The current model when it comes to SDRs and BDRs, I gotta tell you, it's broken. We gotta fix it. And on today's episode, we're gonna tackle it head on. Hey, please don't get offended. Check it out. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I'm your host, Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. And I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have the one and only Dr. Howard Dover. Dr. Dover wrote a book, which you should check out. We have in the show notes today. We're going to be touching a little bit more about. It's a sales innovation paradox. And you can find the link down below. Again, the sales innovation paradox. You can find that on Amazon. In our conversation, Dr. Dover and I, we were introduced by one of our other friends. Thanks, Ryan, at a conference, Dreamforce recently. And we were talking about what was going on right now when it comes to BDRs, SDRs, and just the world of sales and how there's a better way of doing that. And in the conversation today, we outline what he feels is happening and then some ideas of how we can change that. If this is your first time listening to the podcast or watching one of these videos, please subscribe. Also, tell one other rep, somebody else you know, that how they can benefit from it as well. I know it'll go a long way, and I truly appreciate that. As we dive in, you get a chance to learn a little bit more about the why. Why did Dr. Dover jump into what he's doing? What motivated him? And you'll get an understanding about how this propels him in his career and what he's doing right now. Let's dive in. Howard, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. I bragged about you in the teaser there and some of our commonalities, and also talked a little bit more about what you're doing in this, pretty remarkable stuff, helping the next generation of sellers. But before we, go even deeper, go even further about this. I shared a little bit about, how you educate folks, but how did you get involved in what you're doing right now? Why did you get involved in what you're doing right now?
Okay. So you and I have a little bit of a similar background. So we'll tease this out and you'll decide how much more you dig into it. But, I own my own sales business, and I had my fourth child, and the business was shutting down. And I was at church, and I was holding my baby, who's now 26 years old, and I was trying to figure out, hey, where do I go next? And this is one of those moments where I felt a calling to go get my PhD. It's one of the rare moments in life where God said, "What I need you to do, I need you to get your PhD." And I was sharing with you offline that that's not the norm in my family, let alone to even get a degree. I was glad to get done with the bachelor's. I worked through getting my bachelor's. I made more money than my professors when I was getting my bachelor's, so I did that out of obligation to some people who committed me to doing that. And so when I was done, I was done. And so when that business was just kind of coming to a close, anyway, so it's a calling, and so eventually it took 5 years to get out of the debt from the closing of the business, but that calling came again to say, now's the time, jump in. And I applied to 19 different universities, got accepted to a few, and chose the one university that didn't make a lot of sense for a guy that didn't know mathematics, which was UT Dallas. If you know UT Dallas, it's a quant school. It's number 2 in research productivity in the world for business schools. So we're a research powerhouse, and specifically on the marketing side, we're known for quantitative methodologies. And of course, that's why we teach sales here, which is an oxymoronic concept.
Yeah, I think, when people really understand, sales is not just like the person that has a gift of gab, but really as that person that needs to have business acumen to really understand how the business perform. I feel like I learned in college that the language of business was finance, and and accounting. And I was like, holy moly, I never realized that. But it's, obviously the more you can understand that, the better you can be at business. And so often when I was going up, it was like sales reps, you have to just be slick. You just have to talk a lot. Know
Well,
how to
hey,
convince
let's
people. And it's like, it's way
let's
more
be
than that.
real. There's still a market for that. There always will be a market for that, as long
Sure.
as people are dislodged from their hardworking money from people who do slimy techniques. We'll see slimy techniques. But when we're
Hmm.
talking about a profession in the B2B space, those techniques actually create branding problems and white space destruction if you don't do it properly. So you have to play a different game.
Love it. Well, I'm excited for what you're doing. We're going to put some links in the show notes so folks can get access and connect with you about that. You have some really interesting. What I like about you, Howard, is that you don't go with the flow as needed. You'll share you share the truth and let them take it up at whatever at that point. This is one of those episodes that I feel is going to be the truth being shared, and if somebody's offended, then whatever. There's truth here with this concept
I
from the
think there's
title.
work to do in the field, Don. I think there's work to
Yeah.
be done, and I think some of us have to be bold to call it what it is. That listen,
Mm.
these are people that go out every day and face rejection at a level that is just ridiculously challenging from a psychological
Yeah.
standpoint. And when we prescribe, or when we have a field that is leading a lot of people into a place where, to be honest with you, we're kind of destroying dreams and
Mm.
and careers, and we're pushing great people out of the field by not doing it well. And so to me, it's a calling to the space to say, hey, there's a really good way to do this. And if you're really honest, hardworking, intelligent individual, we actually need you in the field, but you need to go work for great people. And great people need to, get into leadership and bring the right people into the field. I think that's a great field to be in, and it's a highly
Yeah.
lucrative field to be in. But you can get into this field and work for the wrong person and get out of it because you're like, oh, I don't want to do that because I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to do those kind of motions. I don't want to be seen as that kind of person. And so I think there's work to be done.
Love it. Um, this concept, the current BDR concept, is no longer working. BDR, SDR, that's revolutionary. It was revolutionary for its time when Aaron Ross, I think it was Aaron Ross, who kind of introduced
Yeah.
this idea with predictable revenue. Now we're in this era. It's been what, since 2000, early 2000s. Now we're almost 30 years later, 23 years later from this. Let's say 20 to be frank. 20 years later. Um, things have changed. Business evolved. First off, why? Why do you feel so strongly that it's not working now?
Well, I think you have to look at the over rotation on the role. Now, I'm not talking about one industry, one company. I'm talking about the industry collectively. In
Okay.
my book, The Sales Innovation Paradox, one of the things I was tracking quite serendipitously, I was just tracking to say, hey, DFW, how big of a sales city are we? And we were the fourth biggest sales city. And so I was tracking data from the 20 sales cities in the country and watching where DFW was for about 5 years. And in the process, I started discovering the growth of SDRs. So LinkedIn put out a quote in 2018, I believe it was in their state of sales report, that the SDR function had increased by 580% over the last 3 years. So you're looking at 2015 as your baseline. You have a 580%. That's a 6.8x for those who are trying to do the math. And then at 2018, I actually was picking up my sales study, across all markets, and I actually was keeping the major markets with sales roles and SDR roles. And when we started 2018, we were at 50-50. So 50% of the roles were sales and 50% of the roles were SDR. Now, when I say SDR, it's sales development. So that's a proxy for SDR because inside of there is business development across professional spaces as well. So it's not all SDRs.
Yeah.
However, by the time we hit 2011, when I took the last point of the data, we had grown 13x. So the role had actually got another 86% increase in those couple of years. And we moved to a rotation where it was 65% SDRs and 35% regular roles. So what that means, and yet when you look at it, at the same time we deployed all the technology. So sales engagement platforms came out, a lot of automated email, a lot of AI has come into play. So the ability to actually do the SDR work has increased between 10 and 100 times. And yet we increased the role by 13x, while we increased the capacity of the role by 10 to 100x. So even if you're looking at Gartner's research and saying, well, the buyers went from 6.8 to 13 during the same time frame, that means we have 2 times the number of buyers, but we've increased the ability to touch the buyer by 130x to 1300x. Why do we think the buyer's just sitting there going, oh, this is so fun? Please bring me more. Please. I'm just sitting over here doing nothing, and I have no defensive mechanisms. Are you kidding me? They have massive defensive mechanisms. So in the book, I talk about this behavioral shift. Everybody's shifting based off technology, but the buyer is doing a double shift because they're doing the shift based off technology, but they're also doing a shift based off all of our best practices. Because there's 13x of us doing that best practice, and the buyer actually can modify. And the buyer modifies.
Give me some example on that. Like, what are you seeing or what are you hearing that the buyers are doing? I mean, if you probably get hit up as
Here's a great example, and it's in the B2C sector. You ready for this? I love whoever's teaching this. Please keep teaching, and I love you. I love you, whoever you are. So the door knockers, they come knock on my door, right? And somebody out there is teaching that they should step 10 feet back from the threshold. Now,
yes, I learned that.
I actually have a ring. So I love when you knock on the door and step 10 steps back, because you know what I know? I know I don't need, see, I'm in a Texas house, right? So it's a big house because, you know, it's so hot here. We have big houses and little yards. But so I don't have to get up because you step 10 feet back. So I'm using a combination there of technology, and I'm learning from your best practice. Your best practice is move 10 steps back. I understand the psychology of it. Don't get me wrong. If I open the door and you're 10 steps back, it increases the chances of 2 things. Number 1, I step out beyond the threshold. That's a possibility. Number 2, I probably don't slam the door right away because that would be kind of rude. I don't know who you are. You're way over there. So it decreases the chances of a psychological door close, except for the fact that when I deploy technology, and I deploy technology for a lot of reasons, including to see who's at my front doorstep, your best practice added with my technology gives me a double shift, and I don't open my door. So I'm behaviorally modified. I haven't talked to a door-to-door salesperson in a long time. Thank you, whoever's saying 10 steps back. That's a combination of behavioral shift based off technology and sales best practice.
You know, and then you're right on that. You know, when I did some door-to-door stuff, and that was one of the things that they did teach us. You know, give them that room. So you're not
unless they have a ring. Unless they have a ring.
Unless they have a ring. We didn't have rings then. So then now it's like, yeah, you know, but you bring up a point. The buyers are, I want to call it like that evolution, right? Like we are continuing to evolve. And if you continue doing the same approach, obviously you're going to have challenges with that. B2C and B2B, similar behaviors. I see like in a B2B space, you know, I know buyers, like from my standpoint, I get hit up a lot and I know the sequences that are going to come. I'm going to get the first email, and then I'll get like a bumper email, and then after the bumper email, maybe a testimonial, and then I'm going to get like the breakup email. So even if I don't want to talk to you, I'm like, I'll wait till the last email before I talk to you. But I am probably going to delete those emails right off the bat, because again, go back to what you're saying, the buyer evolution. We're getting so many of them. We understand your gameplay, and you may think you're unique, but literally every company is doing that. So fascinating, interesting.
Well, and when you think about it, so anything that we innovate, the more
Mhm.
people who do it, the behavior is replicated, the buyer learns and the buyer adjusts, right? And so it's just one of those things where once we begin to understand this, listen, we have a job to do, right? And so the challenge that we have is so much of the automation that occurred around cadences and around making sure we used multi-step, 27-step. The At the beginning of this year, I haven't been able to find it since, so maybe it was in a dream, but I thought Gartner came out with the fact that it took an average of 66 touches to actually get to the first meeting. And I heard that as I was coming out of the holidays. I was like, oh my gosh, I love that, because I'm going to use that in every podcast, every moment, to say every best practice person is going, all right, that's it, 66 touches now. The cadence is no longer 27, it's 66. Let's create the game plan, because, right, that's the best practice, is now 66 touches. And so the challenge is, once we start determining what works, we scale it. And
Yeah.
there's somebody I knew who worked for a company that IPO'd and then has done many rollovers since. And they had a saying there that said, well, when we nail it, then we scale it. And I think what's happened now is that actually when you nail it, you scale it, but unfortunately you're failing it, because everybody
Yeah.
else is scaling it at the same time and the buyer's adjusting. And when the buyer adjusts, it becomes flat. And this is what's happened with SDR work, is everybody rolled to the SDR and it was way over rotated. Now the buyer doesn't respond positively to it. And then when you include the fact that we have not a zero interest rate environment anymore, we're at a 5-6%. Where is it going to be by the end of the year? All of a sudden, people have to justify the spend across the board. People don't want to have meetings because they don't want to go talk to the CFO about spending money, because the CFO is putting pressure on everybody. And we have generative AI that is creating, now think about the sequence, but it's all being managed. Bad deployment of AI is already in the works currently. I don't know how many times you get emails on LinkedIn. I love the people on LinkedIn. It's like, so I can basically create pipeline for you with AI tools in a matter of 30 days. And I always love it, because I'm like, so I'm a professor, right? So you're really good at your job, because your job is pray and spray, and you do know I'm a professor, right? And it depends on who they are. If they're young, I'm kind. If they're not, if they're blatant, I report them to LinkedIn all the time. I say,
Yeah.
report, because to me it's just bad. People are
Yeah.
destroying the white space and causing what I would call dust bowl conditions in the marketplace, that white spaces are now dust bowls.
So with this, then we have way more SDRs doing overloaded number of way putting way more activities out there. They're just putting gas on fire, and just keep burning everything, hoping that they'll get what they want. What is the solution? Buyers know what they're understanding our gameplay. They're adjusting. What is the solution?
Well,
What
I think the first thing
what are your
is
thoughts here?
you have to have a product that matters. This moment that we used to have back before Q4 of last year, nice to have work. Now it's must to have is essential. Nice to have is in trouble. So let's assume that you're working for a must to have technology or a must to have product. Well, then you got to be honest about the fact that you have to, pattern interruption really matters. You've got to understand the pattern that everybody else is doing. Um, Sorry to throw a potential competitor, but Beck Holland talks about pattern interrupt a lot. I think you have to
Mhm.
realize that when during the pandemic, I actually interviewed several of our former students, and during the pandemic, and they were knocking it out of the park. And I said, what is the one thing you're doing? And I just was trying to figure out, why are they succeeding when everybody else was struggling? The common theme was this: They said, I am constantly agile to where the customer is moving. That means I'm not doing the same outreach. I'm not doing the same tactics. Even 3 weeks back, I've changed what I do because I'm listening, I'm watching, and I'm adjusting. We've taught for years at UTD that you probe and adjust. You probe into the market, you see what the reaction is, then you adjust the strategy. You don't wait for a best practice to filter down from the training. You simply probe
Mhm.
and adjust. You adjust to the fact that, hey, if I do a 13-step cadence and I'm really not getting the results, maybe I should not do a 13-step cadence. Maybe I should, once again, pattern interrupt and say, well, how do I get your attention? At the end of the day, this is what we all need to do if we're trying to do prospecting, we're trying to do outbound, right? And I do this with my students. I say, I have a gift here, and if you knew what this gift was, you would let me give it to you. And I usually have a student on the front row, and I usually call them by name. So Don, you're in the front row, and I said, if I came to you and I gave you this gift, you know me, I'm the professor and you're the student. Would you take my gift? And you would say, yes, I'll take the gift, right? And then I usually say, well, okay, now let's change the scene. Now I usually pick a female because of why I changed the scene. I say, now let's go to downtown Dallas. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm wearing a hoodie and it's dark. It's an alleyway. You're coming out of wherever you were with friends, but you're walking to your car. And I come to you with my hand out like this and say, hey, I said, how are you feeling now? And inevitably they say, scared. I don't want to talk to you. I'm in a defense. I said, well, why? It's the same thing. I have a gift. And if you knew what it was, you'd accept it. And she goes, but I don't know you. It's downtown. I'm in a situation. I've been behaviorally adjusted to when I'm in that moment, I'm different. And so, we do a series of activities and workshops around this to try to understand the behavioral concept of a buyer. It isn't that the buyer doesn't want to talk to you. It's that the buyer has been assaulted by outreach. That once we understand this and say, okay, if I just act differently than everybody else out there, which is really hard because I have to think. I can't go to
Yeah.
everybody's training because everybody's training is teaching me what to do, what everybody's doing. And if I could be honest about what's actually happening to you and just get your attention in a unique way that says, I just want to tell you something. And if it's not right for you, I'm going to go away. And I think most people are actually pretty open to that. But the challenge is we've really trained, we've had a decade of learning how to hack this and hack that. We're in a hack
Mhm.
mode instead of a professionalization mode. And I think we're just going to get to this point where, first off, I don't think SDRs are necessarily performing the function that they used to. I think the efficacy, I don't know what you heard at Dreamforce. I was hearing pretty consistently that outbound people are just not getting what they used to get out of the SDR function, and they don't really know what to do with their SDRs.
Yeah.
So I think we naturally have to say, well, that's probably going away. And that means probably a reduction. I don't think it's an elimination. I think it's a reduction of the number, or we're going to have full life cycle, right? That you're going to have to go out and get your own leads. You're going to have to bring in your own pipeline. So we're gonna go back to the future, right? Go back to before maybe Aaron Ross, before predictive revenue. I don't know if that's the answer, but I think something is, and I think everybody's going to be in a process of discovery. Like how do we actually go to market? But we have a lot of people with a lot of skills that maybe aren't right for the moment that we live in.
Mm. Yeah. I think you bring up an interesting point here. First, this is very fascinating, and I think there's a lot of truth to what you're sharing as far as this idea of iterating, evolving, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. If we can help, um, Scott Leese is a very big
Oh yes,
believer in this idea too. Like he is just this concept that it's too over processed, um, so to speak. But if we can just have people think and become like business minded, I think that'll be great. I also believe, and I don't know if it's just a sales problem. I think it's a general business problem where, go back to what you're saying, we systematize and we scale what works, and this is the methodology. So it's really hard to scale a really successful sales professional because she may be doing something that's different and not necessarily like repeatable. She's not making this, she does the 17 calls and then she does 3 LinkedIn posts. She may do that, but it's just maybe different from her taking advantage of social, or taking advantage of snail mail, or taking advantage of whatever to grab the prospect's attention. It's really hard to make that predictable. But what's more predictable is if we can teach them to understand human behavior and how
Yes.
people and creativity. I think that's where the difference come in. The people that grasp that, kind of like what you're sharing, they tend to stand out because they see that. It just really, I find it exciting. I think it's an exciting time we're in right now. And if people, the flat earthers, so to speak, that still want to stay the same, I think they're gonna have a hard time in the future.
Well, in the book, I talk about years ago, the Sales and Ambulance Society had its first annual meeting. We hosted it at UT Dallas because they didn't have an organization. We said we would host it. Then they ended up doing part of it at UT Dallas, part of it at a hotel. But I was asked to give the opening keynote, and so I was supposed to talk about where we needed to take sales and sales training and sales strategy, and why we needed to move. And Scott Santucci gave me the assignment, and I said, well, he said, I want you to get them scared, and then I'm going to take them out of the. He said, you need to go to the valley of death, and I'll come behind you. And so this is really the truth behind the story. I got sick, and I was still, I was like, okay, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? And it came to me, and I share some thoughts here. When I say it came to me, I feel I was inspired to go look at this idea of the Dust Bowl. And I was sick, so I watched a 6-hour series on the Dust Bowl from the PBS special, and then I condensed that into a keynote, and I bring that into the book a little bit and talk about it several times. That what they did in that Four Corners region of Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado is they overplowed the land, and they caused one of the greatest ecological disasters of American history because they mechanized the plowing of the fields, and they basically got to the point where the fields would just blow away. So what it took eventually is that it wasn't the fact that they were plowing the field. It was the fact that the disc plow had 32 discs, and the disc plow only went a few inches below, and the rows were too close together. And so somebody, a professor at one of the universities in the area, came up with the fact that it had nothing to do with mechanization. It had to do with two things. You had to dig the row deeper and give more space between each row, so that the topsoil and the prairie grass would actually stay in between the row and hold the soil in place, because the prairie grass would do that. And if you would simply do that, you actually got greater harvest. They actually tripled to quadrupled the harvest for every farm that started using this new plow technique. By the way, you could run multiple deep plows. It wasn't mechanization. Does that make sense? So the
It sure
challenge
does.
our field is in right now is exactly the problem the Dust Bowl had, which is we're deep into the mechanization, but the technique is wrong. So we're into the
Yeah.
efficiency game, and what we need to be doing is looking at the effectiveness game. So when they found out the deeper and the separated, then they could go back to mechanization. Then you could get a machine that would do that like 12 rows at a time or 20 rows at a time. It was the fact that we simply did what we did before, but we mechanized it. And in this case, the land became fallow. And it became fallow for years and actually killed people. Now, when we bring this up to our time, truly our fields are fallow. That's what we're hearing, right? In 2023, the fields are fallow. You send SDRs out, they're not getting any appointments, they're not getting the same things they were getting in 2022. So our fields are fallow. So what is the new technique? We've got to focus on efficacy first, and then we move to mechanization. But most companies start with mechanization, and the same thing's happening with generative AI. And so this is a big moment, and yet if you do it right, it's ridiculous the magnifying effect. My students who were trained in this concept from the last few years, they're producing at double, 6x, 10x of their peers consistently. And that's not me, that's them being smart. Does that make sense? I taught them probe and adjust. I taught them, hey, the buyer's going to react. I taught them that technology will always assist you to mechanize whenever you find the effective way to do it, then bring the technology to amplify. So they've learned the proper balance of tech is my friend, but efficacy is my measurement. I'm going to go after efficacy. I'm going to always watch about what is effective, and then I'm going to deploy a technology to get more efficient at it. I'm not just going to work on the efficiency game. I'm going to work on both the effectiveness and the efficiency. I'm not going to run after a best practice, but I am going to run after what works. And then I'm going to infect the org. So my students tend to affect the people around them. So they tend to cause problems, actually, or they cause infectious productivity. And it's been a fun thing to watch. It's very serendipitous. I wish I was smart to say that, I developed the Howard Dover model. And, it happened through the process of working with some great partners like Adobe and IBM and HPE down the road and some great people over at Lennox Corporation. I mean, we've collaborated with the development of what we go to market with and how we train. So they would give us feedback and say, wow, your kids are really outperforming these areas. And then our alumni would call us back and say, hey, here are the 3 things where I just killed it. Here are the 2 things you just completely missed. And after a decade of that, we've just gotten better at what we do.
Love it. Listen, Howard, I wish we can go on for days on this topic. This is good. We're going to make sure folks get back to you because I think there's a lot here to this, this idea. If there's one thing you want a sales leader listening to this episode to walk away with, what's that one major piece of advice?
Allow deviation. Don't require conformity in a market like this. Because you have to allow deviation to discover. You have to allow agility. Agility will create the new technique that will bring things about. And let's get away from this mechanization concept for a little bit until we know what's working. So
love it. If folks want to get in touch with you, Howard, how do they do so? And to check out
LinkedIn is the best place. The book's Sales Innovation Paradox is available on Amazon, but LinkedIn is my place. Email is a horrible place, as we just discussed, because of all the cadences people throw at me.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. Appreciate you helping us with this and helping us to shed light on this topic. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Hey, that was Howard Dover. If you haven't connected with him as of yet, go ahead and find him down below. We have his LinkedIn connection information as well as his book, and I recommend you check it out on LinkedIn. I think the concept here was just like remarkable, and this is a caliber of conversation, insights that he shared, because it's not so much, the idea here of like, let's just put more on there. Let's just put more fire on the fuel on the fire. It's more about how do we help our individuals to think more business minded and to help them to perform more of it like the consultant. Fantastic episode. Again, please go ahead and connect with them on LinkedIn. If you haven't done so, check out our sponsors because they're also offering you some amazing things that can help you to better improve and to sell better. It's remarkable all around. So go ahead and find all of the information down below in the show notes. Again, I appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for taking the time to show up today. And as always, we want you to 3 to 5x your sales pipeline, double your close rate, and most importantly, raise your level of thinking and do big things. Thanks so much. See you on the next one.